Well, friends, I bet between our collective experiences, we know this story. And so tonight I want to tell this story together. The different parts, starting off at the beginning and lead through, and we'll see if we can end up with the star and some wise men at the end. But let's see here. Where would I find the Christmas story if I were to look for it in the Bible? Start easy. Let's start with the Gospels, right? Because you're going to start with the Gospels teach us about Jesus. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Stick with these. Can't go wrong. But Christmas story isn't found in all the Gospels, right? So where do I need to look? Luke is one of them. And Matthew. Matthew and Luke's Gospels. If you take the four Gospels and you use that joke about the blind men who are touching the elephant. And one blind man comes up and he gets a hold of the elephant by the trunk and says, "Oh, this feels like a snake." And another blind man gets a hold of the elephant by the tail and, it feels like a rope. And one gets a hold of a leg and it's like a big tree trunk. And they're each are coming in at a different angle on that elephant, but they're all describing a different part. And collectively, they're describing that elephant, right? And our Gospels are kind of like that. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are coming at the stories of Jesus at different angles. And collectively, we have something very powerful, but each one is giving a full thesis, as it were, a hypothesis. This Jesus, he's the Messiah. He's the one we were waiting for. And so it's the beginnings of Matthew and Luke's Gospels that contain our birth narrative. Matthew's Gospel is kind of Joseph's story, whereas Luke's is very much Mary's version of events. All right, here's a question. With whose birth does the Christmas story begin? It's going to be a trick question, right? Because I wouldn't ask and you just say, well, Jesus, of course. No, it starts with Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist. John preceded Jesus with his parents, Zachariah and Elizabeth, and it's their story that starts it off. Now, I brought a nativity creche with me to help tell this story tonight. How many of you have nativity creches at home? Some of you do, set them out. I bet yours have things like Mary and Joseph and Jesus and a stable and some wise men and some angels, that kind of thing. You know what none of the creches I've ever seen include is Zachariah and Elizabeth and John. So I've had to create some backup figures. So I've got an angel to start us off because it's the angel Gabriel who's the one to talk to Zachariah. Zachariah is the dad. He was a priest figure. But because we don't have a Zachariah in a creche, I'm just going to use Mr. Potato Head there. The thing we need to know about Zachariah and Elizabeth. They were old. They were senior citizens. They were long past the age of bearing children. And Elizabeth was barren. They had never had a child. Well, Zachariah was a priest, and in the casting of lots, it was his turn to go into the sacred space in the temple and to light the incense on the altar and to worship God. And while he was doing that, an angel appeared to him and explained that he and his wife were going to have a miracle child in their old age. Not just any child, but one who would be a prophet. The prophet who was foretold, who would come before the Messiah to prepare the people. And so at first Zachariah, he doesn't believe it. He said, well, how can this be? My wife Elizabeth, she's getting on in years. She's never had a child. This isn't going to happen. And the angel says, I come from the presence of God. You're going to have this child. He's going to prepare the people for the Messiah. And as a response, Zachariah was made mute for the remainder of the pregnancy. So until John was to be born. So that's the beginning of our story with Zachariah and with the angel. Now our angel needs to go and visit somebody next. Who does the angel visit next? Mary comes next. What do we know about Mother Mary? What do we know? Call out something we know about Mary. She's a virgin. She's not married yet. What else do we know? She loved the Lord. I'll take that. She's probably poor, probably not well off, certainly of Jewish ancestry from the line of David. And so we see this young girl, Mary. We see the angel Gabriel comes to her and explains that he's got big news, that she is going to become pregnant with God's own son. And Mary, she responds, well, how can this be? I'm a virgin. And explains that the Holy Spirit will overshadow her and the child to be born will be holy. Here's a fun question. Did Mary have a choice? Have any of you seen the social media Me Too, the hashtag Me Too? It's about sexual harassment, big problem in society right now. And so the question of whether or not Mary had a choice is pretty significant. There are two markers in the story that tell us that she did. The biggest being her response, that when the angel finishes with this news she's about to become pregnant, Mary responds with, "Here am I. Servant of the Lord, let it be with me according to your word." Mary wants this. Later on, when she meets with her family, she gives an entire little psalm of praise. She's so excited about what God is doing in her life. Why does it matter? We brought up the question, what do we know about Mary? Why does it matter that she wasn't married yet? Why does it matter that she was a virgin? Well, if there's no father of a pregnancy, what do we call that? Got to call that a miracle, right? Who's responsible for miracles? God is. It's an underscoring that the life in the child is the divine life of God. That's the big deal. All right, so Mary, there's the end of our angel for the moment. Mary's got to go tell somebody. She's going to go spend some time with somebody. Who's it going to be? Joseph. You would think, right? You would think she would go and talk to Joseph, but she doesn't. In fact, that's a part of the story we don't have in the Bible, the dialogue between Mary and Joseph. Rather, she goes and sees Elizabeth. Again, there's no Elizabeth in any nativity creche, so since I already used a Mr. Potato Head, it only seemed natural. She goes and I know, not up to scale. Give me some grace here. Friends, she goes and visits with Elizabeth in her pregnancy. And there's this wonderful moment when Mary and Elizabeth, these two cousins, are brought together for the first time. Of course, Elizabeth is pregnant with John, and Mary is newly pregnant with Jesus. And once they're brought together, we're told that John leapt in Elizabeth's womb. Excitement at being in the very presence of the Christ child, a foretelling of his ministry. Well, to jump ahead a little bit, Mary, she visits with Elizabeth, but that's within the 6 months, so jump ahead 3 months. Let's get Father Zechariah back out here to when John is born. Got a potato. There he is. John the Baptist is a baby, doesn't come with the creche. But John is born, and of course, again, his whole ministry will be calling people to repentance, getting people ready to receive the good news about Jesus. Okay, well, there's the beginning of our story. Next, we've got Mary. Where'd you go, Mary? We've got Mary. She should be at least 3 months pregnant by now. That means she would be showing. Now, when people in society around them saw that Mary was pregnant, who would they assume was the father? Joseph, her fiancé, right? And yet, what does Joseph know to be true? Is he the father? No, he is not. Where'd you go, Joseph? There you are. Here's Joseph. He knows that he's not the father. What does he have to assume about Mary? Either she was unfaithful or something happened. And as the people of the law, the Jewish people, there were laws to deal with either of those scenarios. The fact that Mary hadn't said anything would be the problem. And so Joseph knows it's not his. Mary is clearly pregnant. Public perception would be that it was Joseph's boy. In this society, that would mean a lot of scandal. It would mean a loss of business for Joseph. It might mean relocation. It would mean that he was in hot water. What does Joseph choose to do? Does he move forward with Mary and everything's happy? At first, his plan is to dismiss her quietly. By the letter of the law, what he could have done was to take Mary, drag her down to the gates of the city, take her before the elders of the city and declare, "I did not impregnate this woman. This is her problem. I didn't do this." And the response would have been to stone Mary to death. That was what the law called for. So it's a big deal that Joseph is referred to as a righteous man who didn't want to disgrace Mary publicly, but instead he was going to dissolve the union quietly. It shows that he's a caring man, but to see it through Joseph's eyes, he's likely a fellow with a broken heart. So who's going to come along to set Joseph straight? Again, we're going to have our angel be involved, the angel Gabriel. It's interesting, again, in Matthew's gospel that teaches us Joseph's side of the story, Joseph only experiences those angelic visitors via his dreams. And it's within his dream that Gabriel speaks and explains that it's okay for you to accept the child. It is God's son. There's a summary verse at the end of the first chapter of Matthew where we're told that Joseph did all these things. He took Mary as his wife, but she was pregnant with Jesus, and then it was after Jesus' birth that they went on to have their own children. Those would have been Jesus' half-siblings. So what is Joseph in relationship to Jesus? What is it? He's a stepdad. Right? Okay. So now we've got our Holy Family here. We have Joseph, we've got Mary, but they live up north in Galilee. But what was that little town that Jesus is born in? Bethlehem. Bethlehem is down south in Judea. It's about 5 miles south of the great city of Jerusalem. So how do they get from up here to down here? What prompts the move? The census. The Romans wanted taxes. And the way you took a tax in the ancient world was you created a census. And in the ancient world, they didn't send the census man to your house. Rather, you were responsible for returning to your hometown, the town of your family. There you would sign on the dotted line, and you would pay your taxes. And so that's what brings Mary and Joseph down to that little town of Bethlehem. It was Joseph's hometown. Y'all know that famous image of Joseph and Mary, and they're traveling, and she's riding on the donkey? We all know that one? That's not in the Bible. Donkeys were expensive. Joseph, he was a skilled laborer, but in the backwoods country of Galilee. Mary, she would have walked for 3 days, 9 months pregnant. Don't take Mary's credit away from her with that donkey. Friends, when they get down to Bethlehem, where do they stay in? They're going to stay in that stable, right? Because there was no room for them in the inn. Census has been called for. There's lots of travelers about. There are other people there in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, that have beaten them there. And so we see that the inn is full. There's a question mark, though. Whose hometown was this? Where's his family? This is a reminder of the scandal of the story. That when Joseph came to his hometown, his family didn't welcome him in. He had impregnated a woman outside of marriage. He'd broken the law. Scandal. And so they had to find other accommodations. There's no room in the inn, and they're allowed to stay in the stable. Of course, what lives in a stable? We got to get some animals in here, be in there. And of course, this is where Mary has baby Jesus. What do they lay Jesus in? Oh, he sounds so quaint. They laid him in a manger. It's an animal's feed trough. How many of you mothers out there, having just given birth to your child, want to put him down in the dog's food dish? But that is the equivalent of what we're talking about, God's Son being laid in a manger. Okay, so now we have our Holy Family. We have Jesus born. It's time to start inviting some visitors. Who does God invite to come and to see? Got to have those shepherds first. What do shepherds watch over? They watch over sheep. So there's a shepherd, couple of sheep. We see that these shepherds are outside watching over their flocks by night in the hillsides of Bethlehem, just outside of town, when an angel appears and explains that for them a child has been born right in Bethlehem. And this is how you're going to find that child. You're going to look for that child wrapped up and laying in a manger. And that's when the heavens burst forth and the angels sing praises to God. And when it's all taken back up to heaven, the shepherds talk amongst themselves. Well, we should go check this out. It doesn't happen every night. And they make their way down to Bethlehem and they find it just as they were told. And we're told that those shepherds, they leave and they tell anybody who would listen this good news of what they had seen and what they had experienced. It's the shepherds who were the very first evangelists of that good news. Now, friends, why shepherds? Were shepherds very, very, very important people in the ancient world? Were they really rich? Did lots of people listen to them and hold them in high regard? No, it's exactly the opposite. The shepherds were nobodies. They were in the lowest tier of society. They were poor, and they were looked down upon. A lot of times, shepherds, they didn't own the lands on which they would take their sheep. Their sheep were trespassing. They were eating other people's grass. They were thieves. So shepherds were either seen as nobodies at best, or as kind of riffraff at worst. And yet God invites the shepherds. It reminds us how much God values people on the margins of society. The poor, the humble, the outcast. God invites the shepherds. Now, friends, this leads us to another part of the story that we don't emphasize a whole lot at Christmas time. In fact, I didn't even make any figures for this. But this is on the 8th day of Jesus' life. When a Jewish boy turned 8, that was when he was named and circumcised, preferably at the temple. And so we know on the 8th day of Jesus' life, Joseph and Mary, they made the trek back up to Jerusalem, where they went to the temple and they encountered two figures. First, they encountered Simeon. Simeon was a man who loved God deeply, and he had been told that in his life he wouldn't die until he had seen the Messiah with his own eyes. And as this family is coming into the temple, he sees them and he takes the child up in his arms and he witnesses to anyone around, "This is the one we've been waiting for." In the same way, there was a prophetess. Her name was Anna. She was 84 years old and she lived at the temple. Now, in the ancient world, if you made it to 40, you were pretty old. So to be 84 and to be living at the temple, and when she sees this child come in, just like Simeon, she takes it up and she begins to tell others around her that this is the Messiah, this is the one we've been waiting for. That's kind of the part of the story they don't teach you in Sunday school, as it were. But yet there's still more visitors to come. Who else is going to get invited? The wise men, the magi, right? What do they follow? They got to follow that star up in the sky. God has this celestial event happening. And so we get out some wise men here. I'll add them into our picture. Third one there, following the star. I love to ask this question. How many magi were there? 3. We always say 3, don't we? You know why we say 3? Because there was 3 gifts. But in fact, there's no place in the Bible that tells us how many magi there were. It's only left to be plural. There could have been 3, there could have been 10, there could have been 20. We don't know. Here's another question. So let's see, to add to that, to kind of help us to see that they're bigger, I'm going to add in. So I've got like 3 wise men here. Here's 3 more from a different state. Except the one that got away. So again, it's a bigger group of people. Now, we always refer to these magi as wise men. Were there any wise women in with this group?
No.
I'm not so sure I'm with you, Avery. Why? If you had a group of foreign dignitaries who are traveling with wealth, they're going to have guards, they're going to have servants, they're going to have guides. There's going to be a lot of people involved in this delegation. So what I brought with me to kind of fill it out and to remind us that it's more than 3 solitary travelers, I brought along some Disney princesses. And I'm going to add them into our wise men here. So we've kind of got wise men and wise women coming in together. Now we've got that star. Do we know that they were kings? That comes from our Old Testament. That's actually a prophecy from the Psalms, from Psalm 72, written by King David, that foretold that kings would come and bring gifts to the Messiah. And so that's where we get the detail about the kings. Do they all come on the same night? No. In fact, there's going to be a gap that's going to happen here. In fact, we'll get to that in a second. Got one more figure. When they come into town, who do they come and visit? They got to visit Herod. Again, there's no Herod in our nativity creches, so I've got a Darth Vader keychain. Set up for me there, Darth. Why is that? Why does that work? Those who know our Bibles, King Herod, he was a bad fella. He was sadistic. He was very power hungry. He was somebody who purchased the title king from the Romans. And he was very paranoid. He built great citadels to protect himself if he was ever in trouble. Well, these wise men and possibly wise women, Avery, I don't know, they come into Judea and they visit with King Herod. Again, they're foreign dignitaries. You're coming into somebody else's territory. You should stop in with local authorities and explain what you're up to. And they explain they've witnessed this bright new celestial event. They've come to find the child that's been born. Now, this is news to Herod, who hasn't recognized what's going on under his own nose. We're told, in fact, that he is frightened and all of Jerusalem with him. And they begin to ask, he turns to his chief priest, well, where is the Messiah supposed to be born? And it was foretold in the prophet Micah that he would be born in Bethlehem. And so Herod, he tells this delegation of wise people, go find the child and then come back and tell me, I'll go and pay homage as well. And yet we're told that as soon as they left, it was still the star that guided them right to the house where Jesus was. Now I ask this again, do the shepherds and the wise men, do they all line up on the same night? Because that's how it works. It's how it works in my creche. They're all here, and yet we're told the shepherds are the ones who come on the night that Jesus was born. Rather, the wise men, they arrive up to 2 years after Jesus came. Up to 2 years' time. Jesus is probably a toddler when he receives those gifts. This is actually a place to put a pin in our story for a moment. Remember how we talked about Joseph and the scandal? And how maybe he came to that little town of Bethlehem where his family was and they didn't accept him in? Why did they stay there for up to 2 years? They came from Galilee. But they were still in Bethlehem 2 years later. All they had to do was sign their name and pay their taxes. It was a one-day visit. When the baby was born, were hearts melted? When the baby was born, did Joseph's family hear? Do you know that Joseph had his son and he had to be born in the stable because we wouldn't open our doors? We need to meet this baby. Was there a reconciliation that happened when baby Jesus was born that caused them to stay in Bethlehem for those 2 years? We don't know. But it's fun to speculate. Now when those wise men show up, friends, what do they bring? What are the gifts? Gold and myrrh and Frankenstein, right? According to the video. Okay, gold, pretty self-explanatory. Useful stuff, gold. Frankincense was incense. If you think of the incense they would burn in worship of God, you've got the idea. Myrrh was an embalming agent. It causes us to leap ahead to Jesus' crucifixion, to think of him going and dying for us. But in a practical matter, myrrh was an antiseptic, and so that could help with a newborn being born. But there's the gifts. Now, friends, after these, they remember the Magi, they don't go back to Herod. They're warned in a dream to go home by another road. Let's collect all you Magi here. They go home by another road. What's the fallout, though? Did King Herod just forget about everything? No, he was very angry when he realized that the wise men were not returning. And he sent to Bethlehem soldiers who gathered up all the little boys, 2 years and younger, and they slaughtered them in the streets in an attempt to kill the Christ child. Joseph is warned in a dream to escape down to Egypt, where Jesus starts off. He's born in Bethlehem, but he starts his first years living in Egypt's land. That is until King Herod died and Herod's sons took over the area, at which point Joseph was invited to come back by the angel, and seeing that Bethlehem wasn't going to be a safe place, they returned to Galilee in the north. More or less, we just told the whole Christmas story with those details. In fact, it's worth noting there's only one other story with Jesus as a boy. It's when he's 12 years old and he gets left behind at the temple. There's that story. We don't hear another story about Jesus until he's an adult, a rabbi, and he's being baptized by his cousin John. Those years where he's a teenager or in his 20s, those are known as the hidden years of Jesus' life. But friends, I want to bring in just one other gospel. We talked at the beginning, where can I find these stories of Jesus' birth? And we find them in Matthew and in Luke's Gospels. But John's Gospel starts with Jesus' incarnation too. It just goes more cosmic. Can we have that verse up for us, Bob? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through Him, and without Him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in Him was life, and the life was the light of all the people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Friends, this is about Jesus' birth too, but it's the cosmic picture. The language here around the Word being made flesh, that word, that's a capital W. In the Greek, that is logos. It's an active word. It's a powerful word. It's the idea when God speaks into the darkness and says, "Let there be light," and there was light. That's via His Word. So God's Word is that active, creative part of God. And it's that part of God that is wrapped in the flesh of Christ. The incarnation is all about underscoring for us that Jesus' flesh is just like yours and mine. It was the life inside that was the divine life of God, come into the world to burn for us, burn brightly, to save us and to reconcile us. As we celebrate at Christmas and we affirm this is the life of God in the flesh of Christ, leap ahead to Good Friday. Whose life is it that dies for us upon the cross? It is the life of God that is given for you to bring you back into God's embrace.
Hello, I'm James Murphy, the pastor here at Cornerstone United Methodist Church. Thank you for watching this message. I encourage you, if you live in the Covington area or if you're visiting our neck of the woods, come by and worship God with us on a Sunday morning. Our current worship times are 9 a.m. and 10:45 a.m. We encourage you to visit our website for the most up-to-date information at www.buildingonjesus.org.